Okay, so SAHAN Jayasuriya,
There
uh,
we go.
uh,
Perfect.
American author who has made a great cultural work, uh, uh, which is coming out on 5th of August. It's Don't Say Please, the oral history of the Milwaukee scene, hardcore, punk, alternative music band, the KREUZEN. Warmly
Hmm?
welcome, Sahan, to Noise.fi interview. How are you,
Hey,
mate?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really impressed by your CD collection back there.
Well, it keeps on going to another room as well.
As it should, as it should.
Thank you very much, Sam. But hey, where are you at the moment, and how has the start of the year and the summer been for you so far?
I'm doing well. I'm in Milwaukee. I've lived here for most of my life. I moved around a little bit in the last 10 years. I've been working on this book for 10 years, and so I lived in California for a couple years, and I lived in Colorado for about a year. But yeah, I'm currently in Milwaukee. I'm just in my car outside of my apartment, so I don't wake up my girlfriend. But yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's been really busy this year, especially leading up to the release of the book. But you know, right before the book went to print, there was last minute, you know, doing captions or just little edits here and there. Like it's kind of amazing that literally like right before this went to print, we were still making changes. So I mean, it's kind of crazy that you can do that so close to the deadline. But yeah, it's been between that and you know my day job. I work for a 2 year college out here. Like it's been extremely busy, but very rewarding.
Hey,
So
I'm so glad you could make it, and you're warmly welcome to tell it to all Finnish alternative music fans, because I think in Finland, the KREUZEN isn't that familiar. Generally speaking, I could say,
mhm.
oh, of course, there's the bigger ones like Circle Jerks and Black Flag and Kennedy,
Sure.
all minor threat and stuff like that. And but the Croatian is somewhat special to me in terms of their very versatile way of making music. There's no certain genre. There's It's very kind of multiple and musically very talented hardcore or post-hardcore. How can we say it? It's
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they spanned a lot of genres, and even when they were making, you know, that first record, which is for the most part, it's pretty straightforward hardcore. There's still elements there that are, you know, not typical for a hardcore band. I mean, you point to specifically the atmosphere and production and I mean the sort of ambiance on that record. You
that's
don't really hear that on hardcore records at the time. At the time, hardcore records were pretty dry, and that reverb gives it this really kind of eerie quality that I think it's one of its defining characteristics.
yeah. And actually, I play myself in a punk band called
Sure.
Communist. That well, no means no. It's a great
Oh, for
question.
sure.
And what I kind of find the kind of connection between there's lots of connections, musical connections between the cross and no means no. I think there's plenty of the same kind of unconventional vibe in both of those bands and sounds of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, those are both bands who were extremely ahead of their time, and that were doing something that was quite different from their contemporaries. And the people who latched onto it really latched onto it. Like, yeah, the people who like No Means No, they really like No Means No.
Yeah, yeah. For sure. But hey, let's go to the beginning of the writing process of the book. So it's oral history. It's not the most common way to write a book. How did you choose it as a form of a book, and how did you get all the material together and in that specific order? And how did you start writing the book? Where did you get the idea of the project?
Sure. So the band partially reunited about 12 or 13 years ago. Three-quarters of the original lineup got together with a different guitar player. His name's Jay Tiller, who's important to the scene here, just in general as well, just in the Midwest. And they played a benefit show here, and Brian Agnes, the original guitar player, was living in Austin, Texas at the time. Keith and Dan were living in Milwaukee, and then Eric was and still lives, of course, in Amsterdam. And they got this show offer, and they had gotten show offers over the years, and people were kind of like, I don't know if I want to do it. They weren't really sure. And when they got this offer to do this benefit show, it was really important to the band. It was, it was kind of celebrating people from the Milwaukee music community who had passed. I believe it was a benefit for the American Liver Foundation or something. So it had some sort of health related benefit component to it, and the band found it important to perform there. And Brian gave the band his blessing. He said, "Yeah, you guys can do it. I can't be there." Brian was working at the time. I mean, he's still working, but he had some sort of work obligation that he couldn't break. He also has kids and a family and stuff like that. So he said, "Yeah, if Jay wants to do it, you guys can have Jay do it." And he actually even went as far as to send Jay his guitar that he played in the early days of Die KREUZEN. That if you're a musician, it's that natural wood finish Kramer with the aluminum neck, kind of similar to like a Travis Bean or something like that. So he sent that to Jay. They started practicing for those shows, and I decided to write an article for a publication here that I was working at the time. I just started writing about music, and the way I saw it was at that point I knew Die KREUZEN was really important. I had heard them probably about 7 or 8 years prior to that, after working in a record shop in my early 20s. And when I saw they were getting back together, I was like, oh, this is an opportunity to kind of maybe tell their story a little bit. So I did a short article that was still pretty extensive. I probably interviewed 10 or 15 people for it. And when that came out, the reception was pretty good, and people were really positive about that. And people started asking me oh, have you ever thought about doing the book? And I don't know if all the band members had thought about doing a book, and I don't know who, but definitely someone from the band said, we've thought about doing a book before. Have you ever thought about doing that? And at that point, I had been writing about music for a very short amount of time, but I spent my whole life pretty much up to that point doing really nothing but reading music books. So I felt pretty, I was like, well, I can give it a shot, sure. And immediately I knew I wanted to do it in the oral history format because of, a bunch of other books I had read, like Please Kill Me, the main example, right? And then, more recently, there was a book about the Seattle scene called Everybody Loves Our Town. There was something else I was reading recently that was oral history. I pretty much anything. Meet Me in the Bathroom, the book about the kind of New York, rock revival thing. I really liked the way that those books read, because it really kind of put you right there as those events were happening. And, in many cases, yes, most of these musicians, they might not be, trained writers, but the way they tell these stories is better than, any writer could. But also I'm younger than the band members, and I'm younger than, the people who are going to see them. I was born in 1985. And when Die KREUZEN broke up in 1992, I was in elementary school, and I was listening to MC Hammer and Criss Cross, right? So for me to put too much of myself in the book would feel kind of disingenuous, and I wanted this to be very authentic and very true to what the band was about. So I figured, let me do it oral history style, in the format of oral history, and then I can chime in with my own narrative voice when I need to, but let the band members and the people who they worked with and the people who saw them and the people who love them, let me just let them tell it, because it's probably they're going to do a better job than I could. So that's a long answer to that question.
Thank you. That was the perfect answer. And it demanded a lot of work, I can believe. And
yeah.
people, the musicians, producers, wow, Thurston Moore, Kim Thayil, Ian
Yeah.
McKay, uh,
Yeah.
Butch Wick, Michael Allego, Albini, Nico Case,
Yeah.
Bo
Mm.
Barlow, Corey. Then how did you get all this kind of well, all the superstars of the underground say the word for the book?
Yeah, and I forgot to answer something you asked me earlier, but like I just kind of started working on it really. Like when I decided I was going to do it, at the time I was working at a call center when I started, and if you weren't on a call, you would get like a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break, or if the call was really long, you get like a 20 or 25-minute break. And I had this notebook with me, and I would just anytime I had like an idea, I would just write it down, and I had it organized like, okay, like here are some of the people I want to talk to, and I already knew early on certain people because I had written that article. So I had like a really rough kind of basis of kind of where I wanted to go. So I would have like a page and have like someone's name on it, and then I'd write down all the questions I'd want to ask them. So like, okay, when you talk to Michael Alago, ask him this, and this, and then here's a page for Butch Vig, ask him this, and this, and that way I knew that I wouldn't forget anything, right? So I just kind of started, completely independent. Feral House didn't get involved until about maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So up to that point, everything was completely independent. So when it came to reaching people like Steve Albini or Lou Barlow or Kim Thayil or any of these people, the first 5 years was just like trying to track him down just from, I know someone who knows someone who might know them. And then just kind of, really just bothering a lot of people until I finally got in touch with them. Um, what was really, uh, what was really easy for me was in 2020 when we were in lockdown. um, I kind of almost at the beginning of lockdown, I was like, well, like I should probably keep working on this book and maybe, try and finish it. And at that point, the only thing I had online about it was a Facebook page. And a lot of people would find the Facebook page and they'd reach out that way. But as over the years, Facebook has kind of become less active for certain things. It's harder to get people to see what you post on there. I'm still on Facebook just for Facebook Marketplace, so I can buy music equipment. Really, like that's why I'm there. But in 2020, I thought, well, let me make an Instagram page, and I made an Instagram page for the book, and all of a sudden, all these other people who had no idea that the book existed now knew that the book existed. And among those people were people who I'd been trying to figure out how to reach for years. And that's how I got in touch with like Dennis from Refused, or I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, Nico Case, I probably even like Lou Barlow too, I think, or pretty sure. I mean, there's definitely like a lot of people who all of a sudden knew that the book existed through that Instagram account, and they started following the account. And the more followers you get, all of a sudden it starts popping up in people's explore pages, and then all of a sudden there's all these other people who I didn't even know they were fans. Be like, oh my god, I love this band. That's how I reached Nathan from Shudder to Think, and it was just over time of me just after getting enough interviews with enough people, I stopped being kind of like shy about asking people because so many people said yes. And, um, I'm always like very polite and very tactful. So I was just like, at this point, it's like, well, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to ask everybody. And if they say no, then they're going to say no. So for the most part, everybody I asked said yes. And there's some people who we couldn't set up a time to talk, but, save for like one or two people who politely declined and said, I don't really know what I have to say. I love them, but I don't really know what to say. Everyone was so cool and so cooperative, and I believe it's really just because they love that band so much, right? They want to share with me why they love that band, and when they knew that I was writing a book about them, I think much like you, they appreciated that there was someone out there who was telling their story and making an attempt at trying to share their story and also more importantly their music with people who had heard them already, but also people who had never heard them before. And that was kind of my main goal, because the first time I heard them, I pretty much said out loud, why did it take me so long to hear this band? Because after listening to them for just a matter of minutes, I was like, this is just as good as anything else. So, flashing forward to when I kind of started working on it, it was my goal was just like, well, the more people I have in here, it supports my claim that they're important. When you see all these people who are, you know, music you respect or make music that you respect, or maybe you respect them as a musician, that supports my claim. Because really, I grew up as a kid, if Kurt Cobain said he liked a band, or if Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys said he liked a band, or if uh, Zach De La Rocha or Billy Joe Armstrong, any of these people, I would listen to them talk about music, or I would look at the T-shirts they were wearing. So you would see the Beastie Boys wearing the Minor Threat Bad Brains T-shirts, and you would see Kurt Cobain talking about the Wipers and Sonic Youth and Jesus Lizard, and um, and you would do a little research and you find, oh, Zach De La Rocha was in a band called Inside Out. What's this? And I've always kind of been that way. And if I really like an artist, it's not just that I like their music. Now I trust their taste, right? And if you're really into, and am, I'm really into like REM and Teenage Fan Club, and they're talking about a band called Big Star. What's that? Oh shit, this is amazing. So the track record of me sort of following, the maps that these artists gave me, I thought about that when I was writing this book, because I'm like, well, if I saw Lou Barlow say a band was good, at the very least, I'm going to check him out, because, he's made some pretty awesome records, right? So I just hope that other people would kind of, approach the way I wrote this book, and approach those kind of, I guess for lack of better terms, those kind of endorsements with the same mindset I did not even when I was a kid, because even now, if someone says they like a band, if they're someone who makes music I like, I'm going to listen to it because I like the music they make.
I'm just smiling because it reminds me so much about my own way of finding out new music. I've
Of course.
every kind of well, everyone who kind of I know knows something deeper in the music scene, and I'm going to pick something new from them, what they have to give,
For
something.
sure.
Hey, what in the first place, because the KREUZEN operated in the heart of 80s, late 80s, early
Hmm.
90s. Um, um, their work seems to be tied to a time and place. So in Midwest punk rock scene, was it difficult to get the clear picture of the scene at the time when all the things happened in the 80s, or did you get a clear picture of what was the kind of atmosphere, and how did, for example, the hardcore scene differ from the bigger scenes like Washington D.C., L.A., New York hardcore scene? Um, how did you find that?
Yeah, I really wanted to make sure that before I started talking about the band and getting, because I get very detailed sometimes about things that maybe, might only interest a certain sector of people, but I just wanted to be very thorough. Before I got there, I knew that I had to set up the story, right? And even prior to the band forming, I had to set up like, what was it like for them growing up in the Midwest, as kids. And yeah, like you said, the book covers a period of 1981 to 1992, more or less. And, it's quite some time ago. Since that period, they've all, gotten their degrees, or gone back to school, or gotten jobs, or gotten married, or had kids, or done other music. So, obviously I would assume that anyone is going to grow and change in 30 plus years. And this just covers that time period of when they were, for the most part, really young kids. They were, between the ages of like 19 and 29, give or take, 18 and 28, like essentially early 20s to early, early teens. Nope, that's wrong. Let me say it again. Late teens to early 20s. There we go. There we go. So, but what I wanted to do is just ask as much as I could, because, there's not really a lot of documentation, in the sense that like, no one's writing newspaper articles about like, here's what it's like in town on this day, right? It's you need to ask people, and I've learned that over the years, just in general, even before writing this book. If people are from a time period that you didn't experience, you just need to ask them what it's like, because they're going to give you information that not, a book or newspaper or documentary is going to give you. And I just try to ask as much as possible of them. Obviously, they only represent a part of the Midwest, which is the, Rockford and Milwaukee. And if I wanted to know more about, a place like Minneapolis or a place like Detroit, I would have to ask people specifically about, those areas. But I just kept asking questions, and in some cases, it was 10 years. I would sometimes ask the same question or a similar question years later, intentionally, with the hopes of them maybe giving me a detail that they didn't give me the first time around. And then, I would also just talk to other people who maybe were not a part of that scene, and have them tell me, like, like, what was your impression of the Midwest scene? So someone like Ian MacKay had, great insight into, touring through the Midwest and what those scenes were like. And I don't think it made it into the book, but I remember him telling me, like, yeah, Midwest bands, like Midwest hardcore bands, a lot of their songs were, the chord progressions were descending, and a lot of the East Coast bands, the chord progressions were ascending. And I never thought about that. And he's like, I don't know if it's just like a dark thing with like the cold weather in the winter, but like, a lot of those bands, they went down, and all of ours were like kind of ascending. And I thought it was really interesting. But how it differed too. I mean, every place is different, right? And Los Angeles is a big city. Washington D.C. is a pretty big city. New York is a big city, and Milwaukee is not a small town. It's a pretty big city in its own right. But when bigger cities are getting these things earlier than other parts of the country, they can grow faster and they can spread faster. So there were a handful of other hardcore bands in the Midwest at the time. Obviously, like I mentioned, cities like Minneapolis and Detroit. And in Milwaukee, there was, a handful of bands too. And, I'm sure there's bands I know nothing about because they never recorded. But, Milwaukee had bands like KREUZEN and Sacred Order, and Madison had bands like, Mech Mensch, the Tar Babies, and a handful of other things. And I'm sure there's other bands whose names I'm forgetting. I'm sorry. There's so much. But I think the difference in the Midwest was that there was maybe fewer people who were interested. Um, it takes time. You know what I mean? And I think uh, it wasn't like they could go outside and go to a club, and Black Flag would be playing every weekend. They would have to wait for Black Flag to come on tour, right? Or they would have to wait for Minor Threat to come on tour, or they would have to wait for Bad Brains to come on tour, or whoever, right? So and in those days, pre-internet, and I've heard people tell me this about watching De Kreutzen, like when you see those bands live, you know whether intentionally or not, they're giving you the information of like, this is how we move around when we play. This is maybe, I don't know, if they wanted to dress a certain way, or this is how people dance at the shows. That information is being spread in real time. And, back then, of course, it took a lot longer. So I just think, in order to get the information, I mean, now, you know, I can send someone something in a matter of, seconds, and they can have, the same information, you know, in Europe that I have here. But, it took longer back then. And so, I don't know. I just think like every city is, different in its own way. And not to mention too, like, down here, people were really influenced by, a band like Cheap Trick, who's from Rockford, who are fantastic. I mean, one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time, and, different influences are going to color things different ways. And, De Kreutzen were into so much music prior to hearing hardcore punk, or punk in general. You know, there's some people who their gateway to music was punk, but by the time that all these guys heard punk, they were already into Bowie, and they were already into Roxy Music and Brian Eno and the Nuggets compilation, but then also into bands like Rush. And Eric, and I always bring this up because I find it so, fascinating. As a 13-year-old kid, he was into prog bands like Vandergraaf Generator, which as a 13-year-old to have that taste, that's not common. I mean, I don't know. I mean, now, sure, a 13-year-old could look it up, but right. So,
Yeah.
right. And so when you take all those experiences before even hearing punk, and then you hear punk, and then you hear, the early hardcore singles like the Black Flag singles and also the Danger House Records singles that kind of predate that. And then you go to make that music, of course it's going to sound different because you're not just trying to copy one thing. You're taking everything you learned and then you pick up an instrument like, yeah, it's going to be different, right? So
And I think there's not that much people, or the scene isn't that strict to set barriers to
sure.
an art. Am I right with this idea? Or how did you find it out in the process of writing the book?
I think in general too, like the first wave of punk, American punk, um, if you look at the New York scene, Ramones and Blondie and Talking Heads and fucking Suicide, like
Yeah,
I love Suicide. I love that band so much. That first record's amazing.
yeah, yeah.
They're great, right? But none of those bands sound the same. None of them, right? And then when you look at like early hardcore, and I'm going to use both coasts, the Germs, and also a band like the Gun Club,
Yeah,
and Circle Jerks and Black Flag, and I'm gonna put Red Cross in there.
yeah,
None of those bands sound the same,
yeah.
right?
European Discharge,
Right, exactly, right,
and stuff like that.
right.
Yeah,
But when you get a second wave, I think things usually become a little bit more focused, right? And when you get to even the first wave of the English punk bands, like the Pistols and the Clash and the Damned, don't sound anything alike. I guess they're maybe a little bit more alike, but those three are very different bands, right? And even though he wasn't technically punk, like I'm putting Elvis Costello there because he was on Stiff Records, right? I'm putting, all that stuff was kind of in the same scene together, but none of it really sounded the same. And I think, that first wave of hardcore was really, really interesting because a lot of people were doing, some pretty different things. And I think when that first wave started to shift and maybe a lot of, Minor Threat had been broken up by 1983, right? When DeKreuzen made their first album, Black Flag had started to make My War. That is a very different record. The Bad Brains became more of a metal band, right? And when there's newer bands popping up, um, whereas bands like DeKreuzen or Minor Threat or any of these guys, any of these people, really, I should say, making music, they're listening to really diverse things. But a lot, not a lot, but definitely some of the second wave bands were just listening to those bands. So then all of a sudden it becomes more focused in what it sounds like and maybe what it looks like, and all of a sudden it's maybe I don't want to say it's not as interesting, but it's definitely not as diverse,
yeah.
right? And so by the time you get to the late 80s and you get to the things that were happening in New York or whatever, a lot of those bands are maybe a little bit more similar as compared to how it was 5-7 years earlier. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I feel in Milwaukee specifically, like, yeah, there was hardcore bands, but there was also like weird bands like the Oil Tasters or the Amidots, or and in Madison there's an amazing band called Appliances. Like, I don't think people were really concerned about doing something that was focused sonically or looking the same. I think they were just interested in making music that they liked, and I'm not saying that that isn't true for people in the second half of the decade, but you notice a little bit more uniformity, both in the style, the visual presentation, and also what the music sounded like.
Yeah. And what comes to the involvement of the KREUZEN's music, I think the roots of all that is that diverse, wide genres of music they listened to in the early days,
A
how
100%.
kind of develop their style. Uh, um, Above all, what is your own opinion what was the most important kind of mark the KREUZEN left on the Western uh, alternative music history during its career? What is your own opinion?
Oh, that's difficult,
Say
but
what is the most important thing they gave us all?
I think if you listen to those records, and certainly if you read the book, I think they just showed you that like you should make music you like. You know, if you like it, other people are gonna like it. You know, you go see a band and you watch them play and they're like really having a good time, you're gonna stick around. If they look bored, you're just like, well, why should I even care? You know? And you know, even yeah, if you look at the live footage of them, they're always just like going so hard. They're rocking out so hard, and that's not an act. That's them, you know, loving playing music and loving playing the music that they made, right? And I think that approach goes with the records. You know, I kind of feel bad for the people who haven't just taken the time to really sit with those later records because there's so much great stuff going on in there, and I think surely it's not going to grab you immediately, but for you and I, who I don't have that level of CD collection, but I have a huge CD collection. And some of my favorite things weren't things I put on immediately. I was like, yes, this is amazing. It took time, right? And I think what De Kreutzen left on the history of underground music is just do what you want. Just do what you want. And if you want to do something that's totally different from your last record, you should do that because you know you have the freedom creatively to do that. And it's really interesting too because they were doing things at a time like very few bands were combining more heavy and aggressive sounds with dreamy kind of sounds like they were doing later. Like, an album like Century Days, they mention influences of bands like the Cocteau Twins specifically, right, with the guitar sounds. And, now there's so many bands who come from the world of hardcore or metal or just, aggressive music that are pivoting towards something a little bit more melodic and dreamy because they're hearing bands like stuff on Creation Records, right? They're hearing Ride or My Bloody Valentine or Slow Dive, or they're hearing something like Smashing Pumpkins, right? And they're being like, well, I kind of want to do something like that, and they're making this music that's like equal parts heavy and dreamy, and it's to the point where I'd say there's tons of bands like that now, but back then it really wasn't the case. And people talk about like at the time people in the underground having kind of not really being excited about a band like U2, especially once they get into like records like the Joshua Tree when they really start to become big. But there's plenty of other people. I don't know about De Kreutzen liking U2 at that point. I think maybe they saw them on that tour. I can't remember, but you know I think there became this sort of thing where it's like and I think part of it too, with them, people really love that first record so much that they just wanted them to repeat that. And certainly there's bands who they figure out what their sound is, and then they just keep doing it and doing it, and that's what they love to do. I mean, look at NoFX. NoFX has been making the same record for how long, and that's what they do, right? But I don't think De Kreutzen was going to do that even if they didn't make that hardcore record. I think they were just going to keep moving with where their taste took them, because they were into so much music. So I know it's kind of a roundabout answer, but I think ultimately they just left this, this idea, at least from my perspective, they left this idea of just like you can do whatever you want, right? And from my perspective, that's maybe the most punk thing you could do.
DIY in the most
Absolutely.
heaviest way. Hey, thank you very much for your time. We are
Mhm.
almost closing 40 minutes now. Hey, for the last words, if some Finnish or Scandinavian people want to buy the book, where can they order that? And what are your hellos and best wishes for all the alternative music fans, the KREUZEN fans all over the Northern Europe?
Yeah, I Europe has been very kind to this band. In doing research and reading old reviews and whatever, there's records that, the American press didn't get, and the European press was like, we get this and we love this. So, I'm not gonna say on behalf of the band, but on behalf of someone who loves the band, thank you, Europe, for giving this band the credit that they deserved in the time that they were around. But the book will be available in Europe on the 8th of August. And I don't know the specifics of the distributor, but I know that we do have European distribution. I can
Yeah.
maybe what I'll do too, I'll contact my publisher, and then when this video goes up, I can maybe give you like a link for pre-ordering or something like that. But and she even told me too, she's like, no, we're making a conscious effort to get European distribution because they were very well loved over there. So
Hey, thank you, Sam, for the very interesting, very humble interview. All the best
they,
to you, and have a great summertime. Next weekend, I'm going to see Sex Pistols with the Frank Carter and Pori. My first time I'll see the Sex Pistols, and well, they were basically one of the originators of punk rock, and I think the KREUZEN is as valuable band
wow.
punk scene as they were. They were in a different scene, smaller scene, but they were spreading their own DIY thing all over the United States, a little bit more in the Europe as well. But I think your book is a way and is great way to get the band known and great way to get familiar with the band. Thank you so much, Sam, for your time.
Thank you, Mikko. That's very high praise. I'm going to tell the guys that you said that they're as important as the Sex Pistols.
Yeah,
I mean, that was a big band for them for sure. For anyone who was around at the time, and that's one of the first things that you hear, right? So I'll let him know that. I'm stoked you go get to see him. Go stand by Steve Jones because
yeah,
that's where you want to be. You got to go watch Steve. You know what I mean?
he's great. He's great, great pizza player. But
Yeah.
hey, thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you, Mikko.